Welcome to MMO Graveyard, a new series in which we take a large look back at the past of previous MMOs and discover how they were successful, why they died off, what new innovations they brought to the MMORPG genre, the pinnacle of their successes, and their last living moments. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most controversial MMORPGs of all time, The Elder Scrolls Online. The Elder Scrolls Online is one of the most controversial MMORPGs on the market, and one of the most successful ones as well. The game started development in 2007 and is the first project ever for ZeniMax Online Studios, a game published by Bethesda Softworks but not directly developed by them, which is odd considering it was an Elder Scrolls game and is one of the reasons the game had so much controversy behind it, at least if you asked most players and fans at the time. You see, ZeniMax Online Studios is actually a subsidiary of ZeniMax Media, and ZeniMax Media was co-founded in May 1999 by Bethesda Softworks founder Christopher Weaver and DC lawyer Robert A. Altman. ZeniMax is known as the owner of Arcane Studios, which is responsible for the Dishonored series, and Battlecry Studios, which was founded by Rich Vogel, who was an executive producer on Star Wars: The Old Republic, and the studio ID Software, which developed games like Doom, Rage, Wolfenstein, and Quake. All of these games share relation through ZeniMax Media, and ZeniMax Media, like I said before, created ZeniMax Online Studios. Contrary to popular belief, this means it was not just some random studio unrelated to Bethesda that developed Elder Scrolls Online. It was actually very much tied and related to Bethesda more closely, as you can see. ZeniMax Online Studios was founded in 2007 by Matt Fuhrer, hopefully I said his last name right. He was an 11-year veteran of Mythic Entertainment, which was a studio responsible for developing Warhammer Online. The more I do this video series, the more it becomes clear on how related all of these MMORPGs actually are. With all the layoffs in the industry revolving around the MMORPG genre, all of these games actually share a lot of the same founders, developers, and people who genuinely love the games. ZeniMax Online Studios was founded with one purpose, which was to obviously develop an MMORPG set in the Elder Scrolls universe. And in 2007, the company also announced partnership with Simutronics for the use of the Hero engine, the same engine used in Star Wars: The Old Republic and Rift, which shouldn't be a surprise as, like I said before, all of these MMORPGs tend to be more closely related than people realize. The studio began development of the game in 2007, and it took 7 long years of development in combination with over a $200 million budget, putting it on the same level of development costs as Star Wars: The Old Republic. Yet over 7 years of development, that cost is really not that high, but it still puts the game on basically the most expensive MMORPG ever developed list with The Old Republic, considering vanilla World of Warcraft, for example, only took like $60 million in 2004, which would probably be around like $80 to $90 million if adjusted for inflation now. The point being that these games are not cheap to make by any means, and the more money you put into it does not always guarantee success. It was not until November 8th, 2012 that the game was formally announced with the YouTube video called An Introduction to the Elder Scrolls Online.
With the Elder Scrolls Online, we're bringing 2 different groups of players together. We got the Elder Scrolls crowd, which is used to great games like Skyrim and Oblivion and Morrowind and the older games. And then we have the MMO crowd, which is used to all the great MMOs from the last 15 years. We're bringing them all together into one great game, and we're really excited to tell you about it.
Elder Scrolls Online, everything you need to know about it is right in the name. It's Elder Scrolls, but it's online. And when the team set out, they wanted to create strategic real-time combat. We wanted to create a lot of world immersion. We wanted to create a landscape that was rewarded exploration. But all of that had to be brought together with really great social systems.
So Elder Scrolls Online, it's set 1,000 years before Skyrim. And not only is it 1,000 years before Skyrim, but it draws on all the legends and everything that you've read about in the books that you find in Elder Scrolls games. So we've got 20 years of lore to draw upon.
We made sure that Morrowind, Cyrodiil, and Skyrim feel like they do in Elder Scrolls 3, 4, and 5. The art style is right in line with those titles. Now you can explore all of Tamriel. You can return to places that you've seen before, and you can explore new places that you've never been.
As you can see, the game had a lot of passion from its developers behind it and a lot of high hopes for succeeding. The game was going to be an open-world MMORPG that would let players explore the lands of Tamriel, and it was also going to be, like Star Wars The Old Republic, a fully voice-acted MMORPG giving the player dialogue options as they go through the story, comparable to previous Elder Scrolls games like Oblivion and Skyrim. The developers really wanted players to feel like it was an Elder Scrolls game just as much as it was an MMORPG. Games like Oblivion and Skyrim had restricted the player to one part of Tamriel, but this game wanted to make the map fully available. Players would be able to travel freely from Skyrim to Cyrodiil to Valenwood to Hammerfall and so forth. This in part is what made players so excited, as it was going to be the first time they would be able to travel through Tamriel, for the most part fully open to them and able to play through. The studio also put a lot of time into development of their own unique faction system, or as they called it, alliance system, in which 3 alliances from the Ebonheart Pact, Eldamiri Dominion, and the Daggerfall Covenant would be at war with each other, giving a new depth of gameplay to the players playing the game. Most players at the time were used to having a 2-faction system in MMORPGs, so this was somewhat a breath of fresh air in that regard. Beta signups for The Elder Scrolls Online began on January 21st, 2013, and continued for 7 rounds until February 26. Curiously enough, in June 2013, the game was announced for the PlayStation 4 console by Sony, and this was one of the first big MMORPGs announced for console. It was also later announced by Microsoft as also coming to the Xbox One, which made a lot of console players excited. The game was going to be a subscription-based MMORPG, and developers had hopes that this would be enough for the game to recoup from its high development costs. Unfortunately, though, the console versions were delayed on May 8th, 2014, and was announced as not being available until the end of 2014. Reasons for this were not exactly clear, though the company did face a lot of layoffs prior to the console release, which could have contributed to this. Who knows, as the information is really all speculative. The game launched officially on PC and Mac on April 4th, 2014, with PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions being eventually released in summer 2015, over like a year later, which is just ridiculous. The game launched with Metacritic scores of between 71 to 78 depending on platform, though no really noticeable differences between the versions despite maybe the PC being the superior version for performance with proper hardware, and the fact that 1 year later means console players did not have to deal with as many bugs at launch and got the Tamriel Unlimited Edition, which meant no subscription fees as sub fees were phased out in favor of a free-to-play model, though with a box fee. And if you were to ask me, I would say the console release probably took forever to come out after because of the developer layoffs, in combination with the game's transition from subscription model to free-to-play model with a box fee. Let's take a look at how successful this game actually was though at launch, and what it did well. So did Elder Scrolls Online really capture the glory of the Elder Scrolls games before it? Well, depending on who you ask, that answer is really going to be either yes or no. You see, Elder Scrolls Online is really more of an MMORPG than anything, and for many gamers that's a good thing, but for those wanting that solo RPG sandbox experience that Skyrim gave them, that's a bad thing. And why the game is so controversial is because of the disconnect it has between the fans who love the series, but do not want the MMO restrictions placed on them. One of the key things that Elder Scrolls Online did really well though, is the world. For the first time, it allowed players who love the universe to see the entire world instead of cut off segments of it. Players could freely traverse between Skyrim, Cyrodiil, Valenwood, and so on. No, it does not do each individual zone as well as the individual games in Elder Scrolls universe does them, though that is arguable, but it's cool to see and fun to explore through, and it contains a lot of zones not previously seen in other Elder Scrolls games. The game also had a very unique combat system backing it. It was not tab targeting focused, but it was action oriented. Basically the same kind of combat experience you would expect in any other Elder Scrolls game with some MMO flavor tacked onto it. Yes, there were some complaints I have about it, we can go into that into the next segment of the video, but it was a breath of fresh air. The game also gave the player the option of playing in first-person mode, which is arguably the game's most unique feature, as it's not some tacked-on first-person mode like for example in World of Warcraft, but a true first-person mode that you would see in the previous Elder Scrolls games. Yes, it might leave the player at a disadvantage in a competitive PvP environment, but it allowed the player the option of exploring the world in first-person mode, which added to the immersion of the game. The game also contained a third-person mode as well, which is likely to be the mode most players played in competitively. The strongest feature of Elder Scrolls Online, as corny as it sounds, is the immersion. If you love the lore of the series and can get over some of the half-assed quests, you will enjoy the game a lot, but only if you are a fan of MMORPGs or at least willing to give them a chance. This game is the game that points out the differences between RPGs and MMORPGs. At the expense of the massive multiplayer online world, you don't get as strong as a role-playing experience you would find in a single-player RPG. But if you love MMORPGs and even, prefer them, you will enjoy the systems in this game more so and appreciate them more than what you would find in a single-player RPG. Like I said, it's a clash between the two, and this clash is which has caused so much controversy around the game. The game gave the player a choice of 3 factions with 10 races, the 10th being the Imperial that could join any faction, and was not available unless you initially bought the Imperial Edition. Each race varied in racial abilities, but they also had their own unique styles in crafting. You see, the armor had a fashion element tied to it, and each race had its own fashion and style, which kind of highlighted the racial differences. Of course, you could learn to craft different styles in the game, but it brought an interesting element to it, and it's something that I really loved about the game. The crafting system in this game is superb. There were a lot of styles to discover, a lot of materials to find, and a lot to craft and sell. I think anybody who enjoys crafting in MMORPGs would feel at home in this game. There's also the point that crafting is really viable at every stage in this game, and it really made the system feel worth it, whereas in other MMOs, crafting is really only worth it at level cap. The game also had a very unique class system in which the player would pick from 4 classes: Templar, Nightblade, Sorcerer, and Dragon Knight, and depending on the class through the skill system, you would get a point to put into the class you picked from, which would unlock class-specific abilities. But the main thing being that, depending on which weapon you picked, you would also level up weapon-based skills as well, and specific abilities related around that. The end result being is you could be a 2-handed wielding Dragon Knight or 2-handed wielding Sorcerer, and it was the weapon you chose to play with which really dictated a lot of your playstyle. You would either enjoy this system or come to hate it, as you could find yourself ending up with wanting to change classes later on because it would fit the weapon you wanted to play with more or fit the playstyle you wanted more. In the end though, it gave a lot of control to the player, as if, for example, they wanted to play as a 2-handed axe-wielding sorcerer, they had the freedom to do so, and players could experience with classes and weapons and see what cool combinations they could come up with. Elder Scrolls Online also offered a very strong PvP environment, with an entire zone Cyrodiil being basically a fully open world PvP zone, albeit you have to join a campaign first, so it is in many ways kind of instanced in this regard, as it splits players. Basically imagine like a long ass huge battleground, but still it's really fun if you do enjoy PvP. To sum it up in simple terms, in Elder Scrolls Online, it is implemented into general game story as Alliance War. From one of the 3 factions you pick, you travel to Cyrodiil, which is a huge province. You've been here before if you played Oblivion. In Tamriel, that contains the Ruby Throne, and the faction that rules the throne rules Tamriel. If you do not enjoy PvP, however, you can basically avoid this zone entirely, but for those that do, you would fight over objectives in the zone for control of the zone. There are also a few other more complex elements around this, but to save time, it's basically a huge zone where you can have fun in and PvP, fight for your faction, and fight for control of the zone. Just imagine like a huge ass battleground, like I said before, with siege weapons. There are also PvP ranks to level through, large ass keeps to capture, stat scaling for those who are low level who want to compete, and a lot of fun to be had for anybody who enjoys PvP. To sum it up, I think Elder Scrolls Online's greatest feature is its immersion. It contains pretty much everything you would find in most other modern MMORPGs, and while it doesn't do anything particularly amazing, it offers a lot in terms of exploration, and the combat system that is nothing like traditional combat you would find in other MMOs, but the action combat you would find in single-player RPGs. The game doesn't hold your hand as much as other MMORPGs and really just lets you go out there and explore and discover things. It's not like most MMOs you are used to. It's got a very small UI, which is one thing I enjoy about the game, and a limited HUD, and is more about taking the story approach and finding things rather than an incredibly linear experience that you would find, for example, in World of Warcraft's questing system. It's not perfect, but it's fun if you're able to immerse yourself in it, and like I said in the development segment, it's fully voice acted, which in part is probably what contributed to its gigantic costs. There are a few other things we could get into, like joining the Thieves Guild, Mages Guild, Fighters Guild, Dark Brotherhood Guild, where you do quests and attain rewards / skills, and the entire becoming a vampire and werewolf thing the game also offers. But to save time, I will just say the game had a lot of cool things found in previous Elder Scrolls games in it, and if you enjoyed the previous Elder Scrolls games, you likely would enjoy this one if you are open to the idea of an MMORPG. The game also had a main storyline for you to go through as well, in combination with thousands of different side quests. In short, the game offered a lot of content for people into the series. Let's take a look at some of the things the game did not do so well though, and why it got so many varied review scores from critics. So to understand this segment a bit better, I'm going to give you guys a quote. The quote is from a fan of the Elder Scrolls series, and the person says, Elder Scrolls Online answered the question no one was asking. People wanted another Skyrim, they didn't want a Skyrim MMO. Everything that made Skyrim so cool and such an awesome game simply doesn't translate to the MMO world. So do I personally agree with this quote? Well, no, not really, but it helps to understand the mindset of those who reviewed the game poorly. The flaw in which they had was they were reviewing an MMORPG game on the same scale used to review a single-player RPG game, and docked the game points for basically not being another single-player Elder Scrolls game, which is unfair because the game is in a separate genre and was not trying to be what they had asked for, and should not be docked as such for it. As an MMORPG, Elder Scrolls Online really was and is a great game in my opinion, one of the best by far. However, it is not without its flaws, so to be fair, you will not find me shitting on this game for not being another Skyrim and complaining that it differs from that formula, but as an MMORPG, I will point out some of the flaws it has as an MMORPG. The first being, it was a subscription-based MMORPG. Now I know this will piss some people off, but the fact is the subscription-based model for MMORPGs is kind of dated at this point. Even the MMOs with the biggest of budgets like Star Wars The Old Republic, Rift, WildStar, all launched with subscription-based models, all with great gameplay far exceeding that of even vanilla World of Warcraft in some regards, but were unable to capture upon that success. The reason being is not because the games themselves are flawed, but people are not willing to spend $15 a month for any long period of time on a brand new MMORPG. And you could argue, well, WoW still does it, and you would be correct, it does, but it always has, and it revolutionized the entire genre. It is built upon the holy grail of Blizzard Entertainment, and it is what people have come to expect. But even WoW has suffered due to the market just not being there anymore for that kind of model. There are too many free-to-play games on the market right now that are great and offer a great experience. I myself prefer the model of pay the box fee and then no subscription fee with a cash shop in the game of maybe cosmetic-based things, and I think if Elder Scrolls Online initially launched with this model, it would have found more success. I know there will be many people who disagree with me here, but the market really has spoken on this, and gaming companies have finally agreed. It has very little to do with how great the games are, and until we get an MMORPG that might revolutionize the entire genre again, I can't see subscription fees ever working again in this kind of market. The market has changed too much, and I can't really dock Elder Scrolls Online for not revolutionizing the genre either. The second problem the game had was the fact it was bug-ridden at launch, and in some cases nearly downright unplayable. This would be fine if the game contained no subscription fee, as players would not be paying into something and getting nothing in return, but this right off the bat turned off a lot of players from the game, and players expect polished games in 2014. Some of the bugs were like everything in your bank disappearing or epic armor disappearing, and when you have shit from your bank disappearing, armor sets disappearing, and crippling unplayable quests, you know there is a problem. The game should have had a much more extensive beta process, and it is likely the launch was forced too soon by the publisher. Players had to suffer through phasing issues, duping exploits, and PvP imbalance for months after release. Many felt this was unacceptable, especially given the high cost for playing the game. I also dislike the hero engine found in the game, like Star Wars The Old Republic, Rift, and Warhammer Online also had the hero engine, but that might be more of a personal gripe. To sum up some of the fans' disappointments with the game, I will read this quote. It says, "It had nothing of what people love about the Elder Scrolls series and everything people hate about MMORPGs. With the Elder Scrolls name, it simply attracted too many people like this wanting another Skyrim experience. Yes, people are really stupid, but whatever. While the game in my opinion did provide something close to that experience, it came at the cost of an MMORPG like Tax, in which it did not offer that full sandbox experience and had MMORPG features taxed onto it, but really, like I said before, it is an MMORPG, so screw those people, really. The PvP was also and is still also very horribly imbalanced, comparable to the likes of Aeon Online, arguably one of the most imbalanced MMORPGs on the market. Numbers mean everything in this game, and so does gear. The side with the most numbers will always win the battle, people flock to the campaigns with their factions winning, which only compounds the effect, and class balance is really kind of meh, with Templars probably being the worst class in the game, and Dragon Knights and Sorcerers being among the best, at least back when I played. One of the key complaints were the amounts of people running around with magic builds, and resto staffs, one-shotting people and massively healing themselves. I'm not sure if this is still a thing in this game, but at the time I played it was, and you would have these weird class weapon combination flavors that tended to really triumph the others, and people would flock to them, which helped destroy PvP balance. PvP is really either a hit or miss in this game depending on what kind of player you are. If you're a team-based player, you probably will enjoy it. If you're a solo type player, you will probably come to hate it pretty fast. In terms of competitive PvE, there's really nothing like raiding in World of Warcraft or other bigger MMOs out there. There are some dungeons and trials where players get together and beat monsters, but it's nothing overly complex and really not that interesting, nothing that will really make you have to work together with others too hard, and there's nothing in endgame PvE to really hold a player to the game outside of exploration, questing, and crafting. Some players might be okay with this, but this would not be a solid choice for those looking for that kind of competitive PvE environment. However, the game world is vast and fun to explore and offers a lot of cool quests, so it does have at least some good PvE content out there. I also had a few gripes about the combat system, just with the fact that you can only really use like 5 abilities, which to me is not enough, but I guess they wanted the game to be fully playable with a controller. It kinda hurts the game a bit for those looking for a complex combat system, though the combat is very action oriented and with weapon switching it can offer enough complexity for you. The animations enemies have when you hit them are also kinda bland, but it has gotten better with time and is easy to get used to. Elder Scrolls Online's biggest failures were launching with a subscription-based model on top of a box fee, the buggy launch, lack of PvE content, imbalanced PvP, and not really tying in the features players wanted in an Elder Scrolls game that they had come to expect over the years, though I can't really fault the last point much because the game really is in an entire different genre. The game also probably would have sold better if the console launch date wasn't pushed back as much as it was, and in some ways it really feels like a console-based MMORPG for better or worse, though that is also highly debatable. Let's take a look at where the game stands now. So where is Elder Scrolls Online now, and is it worth playing? Well, you can find the game for either console or PC, though I recommend PC if you have a decent gaming PC for the higher frame rate and better community. The game is definitely not as popular as it once was, but it still gets routine updates and is still widely supported on all platforms. There is also a cash shop in the game where you can buy cosmetic items, but there is no subscription fee to worry about, which is nice, and all the bugs have been for the most part worked out, and the game will give you a great experience if you're looking for a unique MMORPG, and honestly a must play if you are a fan of Elder Scrolls games and a fan of MMORPGs. Check it out if you're interested. As always guys, thanks for watching. The next episode will be on Guild Wars 2. If you like the content, please hit the like button and subscribe, as the more support this series gets, the longer I will be able to keep doing it.